Hey everyone, welcome into tonight's topic, which is on the Gilded Age, an era that often gets overlooked in American history, but one that we certainly will not ignore here in our U.S. history class. And with the Gilded Age, that begs the question, what does it mean to be gilded? Well, gilded is really a word that defines something that is covered in gold, but on the inside, it isn't gold. And so in history, we sort of take this idea of the Gilded Age and we look at events in American history, and I have my whiteboard here. We're looking at events in American history that occurred between the 1870s and 1890s. And really this term, historically, has sort of come to mean how things in history may have appeared to be good on the outside, but on the inside there were some lingering issues. And the four areas which the Gilded Age really hits upon are politics, the economy, society in general, and urban life. And tonight, I'll be focusing on two of those a little bit, which is urban life and politics. So something that looks good on the outside, wrapped in gold, but on the inside it isn't. The term Gilded Age was actually coined by one of America's most famous writers of the 19th century, Mark Twain. Mark Twain coined the phrase Gilded Age. Twain was very critical of society. He was a satirist. So he wrote a lot of satire novels, Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer, for example, here's two most famous. And so Twain was very critical of American society as it was nearing the end of the 1800s. And certainly one thing to just keep in mind, everything we're talking about here in Gilded Age, Reconstruction, the growth of the West, those are all still going on as the Gilded Age is starting to set in. But where I'd like to first focus our attention on the Gilded Age is actually in the urban life, in cities. And America, after the Civil War, as we've been talking about, is a growing industrial power thanks to railroads, thanks to technology. But it's also expanding out to the West. And certainly, while the West was expanding, so too were eastern cities. And the growth of cities is really brought on by a multitude of factors. American cities are now becoming tremendously populated, and the growth of cities, we can tie it to a couple reasons here, more than a couple reasons. The first is definitely immigration. Like we discussed today in class, the growing number of immigrants arriving in America no doubt led to a rise in population in America's cities. More and more immigrants were coming from places like Germany and Ireland. On the West Coast, you had the Chinese until they were banned. And then, of course, we had newer ones, such as Italians and Russians and Scandinavians, that were bringing their culture and their languages and their customs to the United States towards the end of the 19th century. The second cause for the growth of cities is the Second Industrial Revolution. The Second Industrial Revolution started to kick in around the 1870s, and this included things such as steel, eventually the radio and the automobile. This is going to carry on into the early 1900s, and the Second Industrial Revolution will also have the airplane as well. Indoor plumbing is going to be a big part of the Second Industrial Revolution. Electricity. All these factors are starting to arrive in American cities, helping to grow the cities, enlarge the cities, and make the cities more dynamic than ever before. And so there's no doubt within the Second Industrial Revolution, this process, this transfer of technology and new mediums for building large-scale factories and goods, especially steel. I mean, steel, if there's one piece of technology that's the driving force within the Second Industrial Revolution, it is no doubt steel. And American cities are going to benefit greatly by steel. Just think about the ability to use steel as reinforcement for buildings, as the foundation for buildings, but also the railroads. And I have railroads on here, not so much in the order I'm speaking about them, but the railroads were also contributing to the growth of cities. Railroads were connecting people and places in ways that had never been seen before. And the growth of railroads certainly allowed for people to be better connected, people to be more in tune, and certainly that's going to help the growth of cities. I've got Reconstruction on here because Reconstruction, lots of African Americans were fleeing the South. Those that weren't homesteaders perhaps went into northern cities, adding to the populations that are already there. And then, of course, the number one reason people tend to move, jobs. More factories, more industries, more technology means more jobs. And, of course, that is one of the reasons why there was so much tension with immigrants, is that immigrants were coming to the United States and looking to take jobs from white Americans. And within cities, the competition for jobs became fierce. And what we're actually going to spend some time viewing tomorrow in class, because I want you to see some visuals about life in the cities. You know, it's one thing for me to talk about what life was like in the Gilded Age, and it's one thing for me to talk about how cities were growing, and that's positive, right? That looks positive. That's the essence of Gilded. Cities are growing at an enormous rate, and populations are booming. And cities like New York and Chicago and Boston and Cincinnati are just growing at an astonishing rate. And the populations of America are now definitely shifting more towards cities. But there is that sense of Gilded here in that what looks good on the outside, you know, the population boom and more jobs and the new industrial revolution and all these aspects that we're talking about, railroads included, not always such a good thing for the people living there. And you're going to be quite surprised at the photo essays I have to show you tomorrow. The last aspect, though, of the Gilded Age that I want to get into for today's conversation about things that look good on the outside but maybe weren't so good on the inside, I want to talk about politics, especially at the lower level within cities. And as cities grew, the demand for more of a political structure of cities also started to grow. But what happened in the Gilded Age is that cities became breeding grounds of corruption and political corruption. And we've talked about political corruption at the national level with Grant's administration, the whiskey ring, and the Credit Mobilier scandal. However, during the Gilded Age, what started to happen is political parties began to build up what were known as machines, political machines. And these urban political machines were some of the most powerful organizations within city politics. And of course, you know, we have to recognize, and this maybe I should have backed up a little bit, but you know, you have your national government, your state governments, and your city governments. And these city governments control the politics within the city. And these urban political machines were names given to the fact that city governments were so dominant in that they controlled almost all the politics within the respective cities. And no example of an urban political machine that dominated all aspects of city politics. There's no better example than one political machine from New York City, Tammany Hall. That was the name for the political machine that dominated New York City politics in the Gilded Age and even into the 1900s. Tammany Hall was the name for the political machine. And if you're wondering what party this political machine was associated with, they were part of the Democratic Party. So these are Northern Democrats. And the leader of this New York City urban machine called Tammany Hall was a guy who was called Boss. That's like, it was his nickname. Boss, and his last name was Tweed. Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed ran Tammany Hall for a number of years before eventually he would get arrested for corruption. Now, what was Tammany Hall and some of these urban machines? And mind you, the urban machines existed elsewhere. Chicago had a big urban machine there, and as did Cincinnati, another one of the largest cities in the United States at this time. These urban machines did everything from rigging elections, stealing votes, bribing officials, bribing police officers. Tammany Hall was really effective as well at taking immigrants and lying about immigrant citizenship to have them vote for Tammany Hall. And so Tammany Hall and the immigrant base of New York City became closely intertwined. And I'm going to show you some cartoons tomorrow. I've got a lot of photos and a lot of good graphics to show you all tomorrow because I want to really bring these cartoons to class. And this is actually where Thomas Nast made a big name for himself. Thomas Nast at Harper's Weekly drew a number of critical cartoons of Boss Tweed, and this kind of helped make Thomas Nast a nationally recognized cartoonist. But to wrap things up, you know, the growth of cities is a great characteristic of the Gilded Age because while, again, the blossoming of more cities and more jobs and more technologies thanks to the Second Industrial Revolution, while these are all great changes that look really good on the surface, deep down there were some problems lingering. And certainly one of the greatest problems lingering were corrupt politics at the urban machine level. And also, as we're going to talk about, and you'll see these pictures tomorrow, life in the city was quite decrepit, quite dirty, quite gruesome, and really the cities were turning into slums of all sorts of nefarious, wicked things that were going on. So we'll take a peek at those tomorrow, as well as continue to look at other aspects of the Gilded Age. And chiefly, we're going to start talking about big business and the rise of monopolies and robber barons, some really cool stuff to finish the week strong with. So I'll leave you all with that. As always, you know, the past shapes the future. Have a great evening and take care.